Shalom. This week's Sedra is Parshat Eikev, Deuteronomy chapters 7 through 11. This section has Moses continuing to caution the people to be faithful to the law when they enter the Promised Land. Jewish readers who are alert will notice that in this week's Torah portion, we have the section that contains the second passage of the Shema, the declaration of Jewish faith. The first paragraph that most people know, the Ve'ahavta, was in last week's Sedra. If you're not as familiar with the second paragraph, it begins in the 11th chapter, the 13th verse, I believe. It's because its subject matter is a little more theologically challenging. The first passage of the Shema, the Ve'ahavta, speaks in much gentler and kinder tones. It talks of the singularity of God, the love of God, the obligation to pass on the ideas of the Torah and the teachings of our people to the next generation. But the second paragraph, it can be summarized as follows. God is saying, if you follow my commandments, things will be well with you. You will have rain for your fields, grass for your cattle, and you will eat, you will be satisfied, and you will prosper. However, if you are unfaithful to my ways, my anger will be kindled against you. You will have no rain, the land will not yield produce, and you will quickly perish from the land. Ugh. How do we understand this stark, black and white formula of doing good, receiving good, doing bad, and being punished? The rabbis of our tradition, and I think we all can agree from personal observations, we know that too often good and kind people struggle to earn a living, and many a scoundrel prospers. We also know saintly people who are faithful to the teachings of God and suffer, and those who hurt others get away with it. There never seems to be justice for the victims they leave behind. I guess that's why this is a difficult passage. I'm not sure who offered this interpretation, but I remember reading a commentary that suggested we might be wise to look at that second paragraph from a different lens, a collective lens, if you will. The passage, and when you read it in Hebrew, it's much clearer because of the way the language is constructed. That paragraph is not written for the individual. It's actually in the plural form, and it was spoken as a collective statement to the people of Israel. This paragraph, when you read it, is a cautionary warning by Moses, not to individuals, but to his people, as they are about to create their new society in the Promised Land. This paragraph puts them on notice that a society built without a foundation of law and goodness will collapse on its own cruelty. You see, we tend to think of obedience to God in the personal ritual sense, but we forget that the law, the Torah, is anchored in hundreds upon hundreds of laws dealing almost exclusively with societal conduct, how we treat each other, from how business is to be conducted and regulated to fair labor practices, from how society is to treat the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the elderly. I mean, these were not in the Torah general platitudes, but day-to-day laws to be interpreted and enforced by society as our collective responsibilities. The Israelites left a cruel society, Egypt, that looked at the other as mere labor and chattel, where the displaced was abused by the power of the state, and the vulnerable was always second to the wealth of the state. And the Torah, the law of the Israelites, was now given to them to change that in their new society. So Moses, before his death, is reminding them to not create another Egypt. This homeland of theirs will be a nation that follows the ways of God, leaving the corners of the field for the poor, the wages of a laborer paid promptly, where the widow and the orphan are never abandoned. And Moses is telling them such a nation will find that they will not have less by doing so, but they will prosper and have more. A country that makes sure that no one falls through the cracks and has a roof over their heads when it rains will find that their fields will not crack from drought, for the rains will nourish and replenish the land. When a society forgets its obligations, Moses is saying it will become impoverished. When it devotes itself to the common good, he's declaring that the nation will prosper. My friends, Theodore Roosevelt echoed, I think, the words of Moses when he said, "This country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in." I believe that's the best way to understand the passage we read this week and the passage we read twice a day as Jews. May it remind us to build a society that is measured not by its wealth, but by its capacity to give and its capacity to share. May this be God's will. Amen.